Welcome, my name is Zala, and I am an art restorer who loves baking. I challenged myself to attempt all sweet recipes from my 1912 6th edition of Slovenska Kuharica. Hello everyone! So this is a follow-up episode on the last week's raspberry kuh. When I was making that recipe, I didn't exactly stay faithful to what it told me to do because I couldn't help my baker's instinct and decided on stabilizing egg whites with sugar added into them as they mixed, instead of, as the recipe asked of me, incorporate that sugar straight into the egg yolk mixture. So this week we are making Redcurrant Kuh, and the instructions for making it are: do it exactly as raspberry one. So that gives us a perfect opportunity to test out what the original recipe asked of us regarding the sequence order in which to add the sugar. So we will be doing everything the same as last week, just that we will put sugar in to the egg yolk mixture and see what comes out. So I'm very excited if this kuh will actually deflate as she warns it might, or will it stay as sturdy as it was with my sugar whipped egg whites. And okay, the only thing that I want to mention is that I did not anticipate that I will be using red currant this year because we don't have that much of it. So what little that I picked, I actually froze. So I will be using the frozen one by the same principle as raspberries. Heat them up, then mashed through a sieve. So the water consistency might be a little bit different than if I would be using the fresh one, but I think since we're already doing the bread soaking by filling, we're doing everything, mostly everything else by filling, it shouldn't make that much of a difference if I use frozen one in the end result. And yes, that's it for this intro, very short. So let's just get baking and see what we get at the end. As I started preparing the ingredients to bake this kuh this weekend, I immediately ran into my first problem, which is that I forgot to buy bread rolls. And since it was Sunday, as it usually is when I'm making these recipes, all stores were closed, so I had no access to any bread. And after frantically running throughout our house, asking everybody if they had any bread rolls on hand, I was left with three options. One, use normal bread, which I didn't want to use because I wanted to stay as faithful to the recipe as I could. Second option was ditch the recipe entirely, bake something else that I have the ingredients for. And the third option, bake the buns myself. And since I'm a stubborn enough person, I of course decided to bake them myself with no prior experience of how to bake buns. So I was I was left with less than perfect buns, let's say it like that. They were a little bit denser than I would like them to be and a little smaller. And I don't know if the problem was that I used dried yeast or that I used type 700 flour instead of type 500 flour, which made the dough not rise as much. But since that was my only option, I decided to use them anyway. And to be honest, when I tried them, they were not like super horrible or anything, just not as fluffy as they would have been if store-bought. So I decided to use 60-gram bun just like I did the last time, even though the bun was different in size, that I thought to myself that it would be more important if it would weigh the same. So because I ended up going with a bun that was a different texture, I adjusted a little bit by cutting it into an even smaller pieces than the last time, so that it would have an easier time to absorb milk. And for the same reason, I also warmed up the milk a bit in the microwave before pouring it over the bread cubes. And I didn't heat it up so that it would be steaming hot or anything like that, just so it was lukewarm to make it easier for the bread to soak it up. And it actually did soak it up very nicely. So the mixture that I ended up with was actually very nice and very homogeneous, which I believe also contributed to the end result of how nice the texture was in the end. And other than that, the other interesting thing was that when I was buttering up the molds, I do not know if I mentioned this before, but when I was making the raspberry Kuh last week, I completely forgot to flour them, because the general section of this book says that when making Kuh, you should always flour the mold after greasing it, which I simply forgot to do with the raspberry. So this time I did remember, but I consciously decided to skip this step so that I would have as little variables as possible change in this recipe, because the only thing that I really wanted to test was the sequence in which I add the sugar, so that I would be adding the sugar to the egg yolk mixture, not the egg whites, and that would be the only thing that I would change, so I could compare the results as accurately as possible. Even though, let's be honest, there are a lot of other variables regardless in making recipes like this. It is so very hard to keep them exactly the same. And on that note, as I was mixing in the breadcrumbs, I realized that that is yet another thing that I probably did differently than the recipe originally wanted me to do. Because when I read the recipe carefully again, I saw that the breadcrumbs are actually listed after adding the egg whites. So not the sequence order that I did here, because I ended up adding the breadcrumbs into the egg yolk mixture immediately and only mixed in egg whites at the end. So who knows? I probably messed that up a little bit as well, but I'm still hoping that it did not impact the result that much. And as I mixed the egg whites without sugar, I tried my best not to overmix them, and I think I pretty much succeeded. So when I started mixing them in, I took that much more care not to beat the air bubbles out, to keep it as light and as fluffy as I possibly could. And the end batter consistency that I ended up with was actually quite okay, given it was a little bit runnier, I think, than the last batch. I mean, with the raspberry one, it was still nice enough. It was fluffy, airy, and with this one I was also pretty confident that it won't be an outright disaster or anything like that. After I mixed everything together, I filled the molds and got them into the oven. I filled the tray with water, so the water level reached 2 fingers beneath the edges of the molds. and I baked at 175 degrees Celsius for little less than half an hour this time, because the first time with raspberry Kuh, I really didn't like how dark the tops looked. So I took it out after 25 minutes. I checked it with a knife. It came out clean. So I just ended baking there. And as I cut it, you can see that it was perfect. So I was really excited actually to try it out and see what the difference with this and the first one is. Another Kuh.
Another day. Yeah, it's a Kuh.
It's very similar.
Yeah.
Mm.
How do you call this?
A redcurrant.
Redcurrant. The redcurrant is barely registering.
Like honestly, between raspberries and redcurrant, if you would put them in front of me side by side and tell me to differentiate, I wouldn't be able to, would you?
These are more sour, I would say. A bit more of a sour taste.
Sour. What do you think about the structure? It's a little less bready, maybe.
It is a bit. It is a bit less than the last time.
I wanted to replicate because of the egg whites sugar differentiation, but
is it any different?
I honestly don't know. It actually might be a little bit fluffier, but otherwise, yeah, it's the same story.
It's the same story, yeah, but it's still great. I prefer the raspberry though.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What, is this one too sour for you?
No, but I thought the raspberries had more juice to offer, I guess.
Interesting. Although I wouldn't say that this one is drier.
No, it's not drier, it's just...
Less character?
Less character, yes.
I mean, redcurrant isn't known as, like, the best fruit for making...
I guess, yes.
Like, sweets anyway, so...
Yeah, you're right.
I guess people stopped using it that much for a reason.
True enough.
I don't know. I like it though because maybe like I took it out of the oven maybe 3 minutes earlier and it's not as dark looking.
But it's not undercooked or underbaked. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, but I think I like this one more. I don't know. I mean, in the way of execution.
Maybe.
So I think I would rate it like, would it be 8 or 9? 8?
I would go with 8, maybe 7.5 actually.
Okay.
I prefer the raspberry one.
Yeah, the taste, yeah.
Mm.
If it would be raspberry, it would be 9 for me.
Yeah.
But this one, yeah, I guess it's an 8. But texturally, it's definitely a 9. So, I don't know. I have trouble deciding on the grade. Okay, so, and this one actually got moved from the mold way easier than the last one.
That it did, yeah.
I don't know why. I changed literally nothing. Like,
It was the sugar in the snow.
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm doing this experiment, because I genuinely have no idea, and it's curious to see. Well, that's it then, I guess.
That's it.
So I've looked at the book, and sadly there is no Redcurrant Kuh either in this one. So we're still waiting to get one recipe that we can actually compare in the new edition. But we did, however, find out that if you put sugar directly into the egg yolks and mix egg whites separately, the Kuh doesn't collapse. And who knows if this is the exact cause for it, that egg whites have something to do with it, because there are so many variables when making these recipes, from the kind of bread you use to how much you soak it, how much you squeeze the milk, how much milk you squeeze out of it. It's what kind of fruit you're using. So it's hard to claim actually that because of the egg whites it either collapses or it doesn't. So I guess we'll get more information on that as we keep on making more of these recipes. And one thing that I found interesting was the buttering and the flouring, because at first I forgot. With this one I intentionally didn't do it to change as little as I possibly could. So in the next one I'm gonna flour it and see if that actually changes anything, because I really thought that you butter the molds so that the release is easier after it's baked, but this one released so easily from the molds that I'm thinking maybe the flour is like with a souffle, that it finds it easier to climb as it bakes. So we're gonna test that one out with the next week's strawberry kuh and see if that changes anything. But yeah, comparing the two, I think even though the flavor didn't differentiate that much because of such little fruit presence, I guess, they did, after I thought about it a bit more, they definitely varied in structure, because the first one, the raspberry one, was definitely more bready as you ate it, and this one was definitely more fluffy, more airy. And if I would have to pick between these two, if I predispose that the egg whites are the cause of this texture, I would definitely choose the way that this recipe handles that in the future. But on the other hand, it could have been that I have cut bread up into smaller pieces, which resulted in them soaking up the liquid more efficiently and making the mixture more homogeneous. So that also might be a reason that it ended up like fluffier and more airy, if you will. And yes, I took this one out of the oven a little bit earlier because I really didn't like how dark the first one was, and I think I made the right choice with that one, at least to my preference, because it was baked but not as dark. So anyway, I hope we get to see each other next week with the strawberry one, in which hopefully the only thing that I will be changing is actually flouring the molds.